This is a Stegosaurus, an iguanodon, and a megalosaurus. But if you go back just 200 years, this is what their reconstructions look like. There were a lot of twists and turns in the story of how these dinosaurs became what they are today. Let's take a look at the history of dinosaur research and reconstructions. In 1676, English naturalist Robert Plot discovered a giant bone in a quarry. It may look like the giant end of a femur, but this is actually the very first dinosaur fossil ever discovered. Back then, there wasn't even a word for dinosaur, so he thought it might have been a thigh bone of an elephant or a human giant. Of course, it was later realized that this bone once belonged to a mighty megalosaurus. While some dinosaur fossils were discovered as early as the 17th century, it wasn't until the 1800s that dinosaur research really took off. At the center of all of it was Gideon Mantell, a physician and amateur paleontologist. Seeing her husband's interest in fossils, Mantell's wife gifted him a fossilized tooth. After discovering that the tooth resembled that of an iguana's, he named the creature they belonged to Iguanodon, which means iguana tooth. He realized that just as iguanas are primarily vegetarian, Iguanodon was probably a giant vegetarian reptile. So he drew the restoration of the Iguanodon fossil as a lizard-like creature. He then writes to French biologist Georges Cuvier for advice. "Hey, Mr. Cuvier, what do you think of my restoration?" "Oh, it's a big animal like a rhinoceros." "Oh, a big rhino-like animal." That's right. Mantell, who was English, had mistranslated the French. Coincidentally, he also had this unidentified cone-shaped iguanodon fossil that he had purchased, and after misinterpreting Cuvier's comment as rhinoceros-like, Mantell stuck it on the iguanodon's nose. Of course, as we know now, the fossil was later identified as an iguanodon thumb. Iguanodons weren't the only dinosaurs with faulty reconstructions at the time. Megalosaurus used to look like a cross between a crocodile and a wolf, and Heliosaurus was originally reconstructed to look like a land iguana. Even Richard Owen, a prominent paleontologist at the time, didn't disagree with these reconstructions, arguing that all three animals would have walked on all fours. Meanwhile, Owen also noticed that these creatures' legs pointed straight downward, unlike those of modern reptiles. It was then that he decided they needed a new name. Finally, in 1842, he gave them the name Dinosaur, which means terrible lizard in Greek. And thus, the name Dinosaur was born. With the title of dinosaurologist in hand, Owen was asked by the British royal family to create a dinosaur display in the gardens of the Crystal Palace. In response, Owen worked with Benjamin Hawkins, a renowned sculptor of the time, to create a life-size model of the dinosaur out of cement. The model was so large that Hawkins invited paleontologists to feast with his iguanodon sculpture at the end-of-year celebration in 1853. The dinosaurs that were restored and put on display at the Crystal Palace remain to this day, all of them walking on all fours and dragging their long tails across the ground like rhinos and elephants. Then, in 1858, some fossils were discovered in New Jersey that changed all that, and they belonged to the hadrosaur. The fossil site contained both front and back leg bones, but what shocked the dinosaurologist community was this: the hind legs were much longer than the front legs. This was evidence that hadrosaurs could have been bipedal and walked on their hind legs, a discovery that destroyed Owen's reputation as an advocate for quadrupedalism. Furthermore, in 1878, a large number of iguanodon fossils with short arms and long hind legs were discovered in the English countryside, which transformed many of the existing dinosaurs' reconstructions to be bipedal as well. Even Stegosaurus is shown to be walking on two legs like this in its 1884 reconstruction. The reason the spines and plates are in the wrong places is because when this skeleton was discovered, the plates and spine fossils were found scattered all around the excavation site. But there was one thing that many paleontologists were unyielding on when it came to dinosaur reconstructions: the tail. The prevailing belief was that reptiles had to drag their tails on the ground, and this was holding back progress. Mid to late 1800s reconstructions of Megalosaurus, or Iguanodon, showcased the reptiles standing with their tails firmly on the ground like a kangaroo. This belief was so strong that in 1892, paleontologist Luis Dallo, while reconstructing a full skeletal fossil of an iguanodon, forcibly bent or broke its tailbones to recreate a tail-dragging posture, even though he knew that those bones didn't bend. And even as we entered the 1900s and discovered more dinosaurs, including quadrupeds like Triceratops and Brachiosaurus, their tails were still depicted as dragging on the ground. But that's not the only belief that plagued paleontologists. In the beginning of the 20th century, most paleontologists believed that the complete extinction of this diverse group of creatures was due to the fact that they were unintelligent and slow-moving. As a result, dinosaurs were often depicted as slow, lumbering around in marshes and wetlands. However, as we entered the 1970s, this old view on dinosaurs was completely turned around. This was thanks to a dinosaur renaissance, and it was spearheaded by Deinonychus. Professor John Ostrom argued that these light, nimble dinosaurs were agile hunters, and based on the discovery of several Deinonychus fossils alongside Tenontosaurus, they may have been clever enough to hunt in groups. Looking at the similarities between Deinonychus' skeleton and Archaeopteryx's, he also made the bold claim that modern birds evolved from dinosaurs. Furthermore, people started noticing that dinosaur footprint fossils showed no signs of dinosaurs dragging their tails on the ground. People began considering the idea that dinosaurs might have walked with their tails up in the air. This fact gradually applied toward reconstructions, where dinosaurs began to be depicted as lithe, dynamic animals. Ostrom's earlier hypothesis that dinosaurs evolved into birds was actually ridiculed initially, but the discovery of the feathered dinosaur, Sinosaurus, in 1996, followed by the discovery of dozens of other dinosaur fossils, including Protarchaeopteryx, Epidexipteryx, and Sinornithosaurus, helped solidify the idea that birds are in fact dinosaurs. Subsequent discoveries of soft tissue and skin pigment fossils, like the ones shown here, have brought on the winds of change toward dinosaur reconstructions. When we think of dinosaurs, this isn't what comes to mind anymore. But the truth is, even the dinosaurs we're familiar with today may be biased in some fashion. The book All Yesterdays by British paleontologist Darren Nash and two paleo artists features illustrations that challenge our current understanding of dinosaur reconstructions. Instead of emphasizing its claws, Therizinosaurus is depicted as covered in a plume of feathers, and Triceratops is depicted with these spikes. Stegosaurus is depicted as having a uniquely large mating organ, a possible solution to getting around the large plates on the females' backs. And Leelinosaura, which lived in Australia, is depicted with a cute, fluffy coat of plumage, an adaptation to its cold climate. The authors say that they wrote the book to show that current reconstructions are not necessarily accurate and can change at any time with new scientific discoveries. In the distant future, how will our descendants evaluate our current dinosaur reconstructions? Science is a window to the world, and this has been Science Dream. Thank you for watching.